What if the most feared car of 2026 isn't a Red Bull, a Ferrari, or even a Mercedes? What if it's green? Because behind closed doors at Silverstone, Adrian Newey has been building something very few people truly understand. A machine that doesn't just follow the new regulations. It questions their entire foundation. No carryover parts. No legacy designs. Just a clean sheet of paper, a factory restructured around him. And a works Honda power unit built for one purpose. To serve the fastest mind in Formula One history. This isn't evolution. It's something much more dangerous. And if the early signs are even half true, then Adrian Newey's Aston Martin isn't just fast. It's a warning. Officially, Aston Martin is just another contender in a brand new regulatory era. Another team preparing for the radical shift coming in 2026, where hybrid power units, active aerodynamics, and energy efficiency will reshape the entire philosophy of car design. But behind that neutral image, something unprecedented is unfolding. Because Aston Martin has done something no midfield team ever dares to do. They've handed complete creative control to Adrian Newey, the man responsible for championship-winning machines at Williams, McLaren, and Red Bull. The aerodynamicist who changed the language of F1 car design is now free of internal politics, free of engine limitations, and surrounded by resources that have no ceiling. Lawrence Stroll hasn't just hired him. He's rebuilt the team around him. This is the first time in Newey's career where the engine, chassis, and aero development are all being aligned under a single vision. No compromises. And the timing couldn't be more dangerous. Because with the 2026 regulations targeting slower straight-line speeds, more sustainable power deployment, and an all-new aerodynamic landscape, Newey doesn't see restrictions. He sees an opening, a reset, a rare opportunity to solve Formula One from the ground up. With no inherited legacy, no corporate structure above him, and no one telling him what's possible. And that's the real context here. This isn't Aston Martin following the rules. This is Adrian Newey reinterpreting them. And as we'll begin to see next, the AMR 26 doesn't just look different. It thinks differently. The public has seen very little of the AMR 26. A few renders, a shadowy studio photo, and an early systems shakedown in Spain deliberately run without telemetry overlays. But those small glimpses have already caused confusion among engineers across the paddock. Because this car doesn't behave the way it should. From the front wing to the diffuser line, everything about the AMR 26 appears to have been designed around one central priority: aerodynamic balance during hybrid transition. And that is not how most teams approach the 2026 challenge. The side pods are narrower than expected, dangerously narrow, some believe indicating a cooling strategy that prioritizes passive flow over traditional heat extraction. No bulging radiators. No oversized battery enclosures. Everything is tightly integrated, suggesting Newey isn't just trusting the car's airflow. He's predicting it. And then there's the suspension. Multiple insiders who saw the AMR 26 during its private test noted unusually high ride stability, despite aggressive low-speed cornering. That's not mechanical grip. That's aero discipline. Which raises the bigger question. Is this car using airflow not just to push the car into the ground, but to control the car's behavior across different energy modes? Because if that's true, then this isn't a car designed for speed. It's a car designed for control. The kind of control that doesn't just win races. It makes other concepts irrelevant. And that's the first sign that something deeper is happening here. Because when a car looks fast, it grabs attention. But when a car refuses to behave like the others, that's when the fear starts to spread. At this point, most people are still asking the wrong question. They're asking how fast the AMR 26 is. But inside the paddock, the real concern is how it behaves. Because when engineers began comparing Aston Martin's early data traces with the assumptions baked into the 2026 regulations, something didn't line up. The car appears too stable. Not mechanically. Not visually. But systemically. Under the new rules, cars should struggle during energy transitions. When electrical deployment drops. When harvesting increases. When the balance shifts mid-corner. That instability is expected. In fact, the regulations are designed around it. But the AMR 26 doesn't seem to suffer from those transitions in the same way. And that's where the twist emerges. What if Adrian Newey hasn't designed the car around the hybrid limitations, but instead designed the hybrid behavior around the car? Because the FIA regulates outputs. They regulate maximum deployment, recovery rates, drag states. What they don't clearly regulate is decision logic. When does the car choose to deploy? When does it back off? When does it sacrifice energy to protect balance? If those decisions are being made by a deeply integrated control philosophy, One that links aerostate, thermal prediction, and energy flow. Then the advantage isn't visible. It's behavioral. And that kind of advantage doesn't show up in scrutineering. It doesn't trigger sensors. It doesn't break rules. It simply makes the car calmer when every other car is fighting itself. That's why this isn't being discussed publicly. Because once you acknowledge this possibility, you're no longer talking about a fast Aston Martin. You're talking about a concept the FIA may not be prepared to police. And that's when a car stops being impressive and starts being scary. You'd expect controversy by now. When a car behaves differently when it stabilizes faster, corners cleaner, or recovers more efficiently, F1 teams usually react the same way. They protest. They demand clarification. They leak concerns into the press. But in the case of the AMR 26, nothing. No complaints. No formal challenges. Not even whispers of regulation loopholes. And that's precisely what makes this situation so disturbing. Because the absence of conflict in Formula One isn't a sign of comfort. It's a sign of confusion. What you're seeing now isn't compliance, it's hesitation. Rival teams aren't accusing Aston Martin of cheating, because they're still trying to understand what they would even accuse them of. They see a car that doesn't overheat when others do. They see energy traces that remain balanced, even under stress. They see a handling profile that doesn't match the math they've been working with for 2 years. And yet no rule has been broken. So what do you challenge? How do you protest a behavior, not a component? This is where Newey's genius becomes weaponized. Because by designing a concept that steps outside the assumptions everyone else built into their cars, he's removed the usual tools of resistance. You can't file a protest if you don't understand what you're looking at. You can't ask the FIA to intervene if nothing visibly violates the technical directive. And so the paddock goes quiet. Not because they're satisfied, but because they're out of language to describe what they're seeing. This is what no one is explaining. Not because it's being hidden, but because it can't yet be translated into the normal politics of Formula One. And by the time it can, it might be too late. Let's imagine the AMR 26 doesn't win the first race. Let's say it's solid, clean, efficient but not dominant. That's still a problem. Because if this car is already stable under the new regulations, if it starts strong without needing radical setup changes or early upgrades, then Aston Martin has something far more valuable than raw pace. A working concept. In a regulation reset year, that's the most powerful weapon you can have. Not the fastest car, but the one that doesn't need fixing. While Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes scramble to understand cooling variances, ERS overheating, drag inconsistencies, Aston Martin will be iterating. Quietly. Precisely. Aggressively. That's when the performance gap begins to widen. Not in giant leaps, but in clean steps, every upgrade sharpened by a concept that's already sound. And the other teams? They'll be stuck in triage, trying to extract performance from flawed platforms that were never built to solve the right problem in the first place. Worse still, they'll face a brutal strategic dilemma. Copy Newey's concept without understanding it? Or double down on their own and hope the AMR 26 hits a ceiling? Neither path is good. Because Newey hasn't just built a fast car. He's built a philosophical outlier. One that forces others to ask if the assumptions behind their own cars are even valid anymore. This is how long-term dominance starts. Not with one lap pace, but with a car that can't be decoded. If this concept holds through the first half of 2026, it will define not just the current season, but the direction of every team's 2027 project as well. Because from that point on, every engineer on the grid will be forced to ask, are we building what we understand? Or are we chasing a ghost? And if they choose to chase it, then Adrian Newey won't just be building a car. He'll be rewriting the foundation of the next era in Formula One. So now the question isn't, can this car win races? It's, what if it doesn't need to? What if it just needs to prove the concept? What if its very existence shifts how every other team approaches the sport? Because that's what Adrian Newey does when he's fully unleashed. He doesn't just chase lap time. He builds machines that force a conversation about what the rules really say, about what the sport is actually rewarding. And right now, that conversation hasn't even started publicly. No one's pointing at the AMR 26 yet. No team principals are crying foul. No journalists are calling it dominant. But that's exactly how Newey likes it. Because the most dangerous machines in Formula One history? They never start as champions. They start as outliers. A little too smooth. A little too quiet. A little too confident in conditions that should be chaotic. And that's what the AMR 26 feels like. Not a monster. Not a miracle. Something worse. A signal. That the rulebook might already be behind. That the systems designed to enforce balance are being outpaced by one man's imagination. And if that's true, then this isn't the story of Aston Martin's rise. It's the beginning of something else. Something the FIA will have to confront. Something other teams won't be able to ignore. Because if Newey's final project turns out to be a revolution in disguise, not loud, not fast, just correct, then the sport won't just evolve. It'll have to catch up.